So The Witcher is a big deal on Netflix, and not just here in Poland. I mean, like globally, it's turning out to be one of their biggest, kind of most streamed shows ever. In fact, it's already been green-lit, approved for a second season, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, I guess. Anyway, we're going to give our impressions of The Witcher. 8 episodes, just finished it up a couple of days ago. We've got some thoughts. We won't dive into the storyline very much. If you guys are interested, you could, of course, watch it for yourselves. But we'll tell you what we think about it. Guys, let's start with, what did you think about the casting, in particular, the lead, Henry Cavill, as The Witcher?
Oh, this is something that was a little bit controversial about a year or so ago when it was announced, and everybody's thinking Superman, bad CG mustache and all that, but I've heard only good things right now in response. He really fills out the role nicely. The makeup, the costume work on him is just superb, and it's that kind of image that suits a lot of people. It's like you have to also understand that a lot of there is mixed fans coming towards this show right now. Part of them are people that just only know this intellectual property from the video games. Well, you also have the hardcore fans, the fantasy fans, especially in Poland, that know of this from the books and the earlier Polish miniseries kind of TV shows.
A lot of expectations here.
Yeah, and
different expectations.
Nobody's really pissed off about the way he's presenting it. The exception is with the swords, apparently.
The swords?
Yeah, he only has one sword here.
Oh, is that a crime?
Well, in the video game, he has 2 swords, and I've talked with some fans. Basically, the reason he has 2 swords is one sword is for killing people, the other sword is for killing, supernatural beasts and monsters. And, the sword actually shimmers, glows, gives off...
That's a minor compromise to make for kind of, filmmaking reality, I guess.
In lore, in universe, it makes sense that in the series. And this Netflix also, because a lot of people were pissed off right at the beginning about the changes they were making. They're saying, but we're going to the source material, to the books. We're not making a movie based on the video games, which were based on the books. So,
Josh, Henry Cavill doesn't seem to have much of a acting range, but it doesn't seem that the role really requires it.
Well, I think there's the contact lenses are obviously a big feature of his performance. It has to
grunting.
It has to be said that kind of I wasn't brimful of enthusiasm when I heard that this was something that one could watch in one's spare time or whatever. I watched the first episode. It was dreadful. It was really, really dreadful.
It's off to a bad start.
The best acting by far was from Henry Cavill. And I suspect if you'd put a block of wood next to him, that would have scooped all the honours. However, it must be said that subsequent episodes really, really massively improve. And I'm about 5 episodes in right now. And he seems it's weird because I don't know if it was filmed in sequence, but it kind of really looks like the first episode. He was like, "Listen, you got blonde, long hair. You're a kind of a strong but silent type, just kind of grunt in a very low voice." But now it's getting on. He's delivering kind of pithy one-liners in a way that, almost made me chuckle.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of his, and before I watched it, I wasn't expecting much from him. But in fact, after watching it, I have to say that he fits, and his performance is enough. I mean, again, this is not a role that requires him to break down in tears and to express his love and to show rage. Well, actually, there is some rage, but in other words, it's a narrow range, and he does it very well, and I think he's pretty good. The rest of the cast, you know what I like about the rest of the cast? I like the fact that I don't recognize anyone or almost anyone. I like that. And I'm glad that the producers of the show, and I don't know if this is because of budget considerations or if this was the goal all along, I like the fact that they avoided the cheap stunt of getting some recognized name into a minor role just to improve the headlines, just to get some more media coverage. I mean, I'm glad they didn't get, Nicolas Cage as the king. That would be just stupid. And I like the fact that they don't have a lot of actors that I recognize, which would take me out of the story. Does that make any sense, Dr. Mike?
It does make sense, but now that you mentioned that, I'm wondering, why is Nicolas Cage not on any kind of streaming show right now?
He's filming one now, I'm sure.
I mean, you just think, and in fact, when you said Nicolas Cage is the king, and I was thinking no, you're nearly there, but Nicolas Cage is the Mad King.
Oh, well, something.
Sitting on his throne, clutching the armrests and kind of,
but
staring.
The rest of the cast is, I think, good to decent. The actress who plays Yennefer, I think, is quite good. Who else? The Ciri.
I had a bit of a hunch about her, but then I lost.
Bad. Ciri is good, but I think Ciri got that job because of her distinctive look. She has this elven look, just kind of otherworldly, Middle Earth kind of look.
She comes from the same part of the world as me, actually. I was interested
in the Northern Hemisphere. What? Where?
No, Oxfordshire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a part of the world. Yes, it is.
So as Josh said, I agree very much. The first episode I think is awful. I think they jump in too quickly. The narrative is not established. The characters are not established. I think they could have eased the viewers in a little more easily. And I was ready to give up after the first episode, but it really finds its feet about halfway into the second episode. Everything after that is okay. Dr. Mike, did you have the same impression?
This is definitely what I've been hearing as well. It's like the first episode is kind of chaotic, especially with the jumping around like time-wise, Pulp Fiction style. But
yeah, sorry, can I interrupt? Can we talk, Josh? What do you think about the nonlinear timeline? I don't like it. I think it's cheap storytelling, and I found it a little bit confusing. Maybe I'm too stupid. I don't know.
I struggle with The Irishman with its non-linear timeline and kind of like really kind of on hindsight, like obvious changes of not just clothing and automobiles, but also their actual physical appearance due to digital technology. And I thought, hold on,
back and forth. Where are we now? Yeah. Is this before that? What comes? It's weird.
Why is it? Why does it have to be done like this? I mean, Pulp Fiction works. I mean, Pulp Fiction is brilliant for its kind of.
Maybe it's kind of done at a level that's easier to follow, but in Witcher, there were several times when I was thinking, okay, wait a second, where are we now? Because a mention of a name or an event that had or had not happened yet kind of threw me off. You know what a walkthrough is for a video game? People will often, like, if they're stuck in a certain part of the game, they'll often pause it.
I know what a walkthrough is in a Chinese kitchen.
And they'll go to... What?
When someone threw a wok.
Oh, God. A walkthrough, W-A-L-K... they'll check the YouTube or check the internet for help, kind of when solving a certain part of the video game. And I think there are parts of the Witcher, Netflix Witcher, that need a walkthrough where you have to say, wait a second, what happened? You need a written kind of guide to what you just saw, because again, maybe I'm just not smart enough to follow it.
There is one thing that I've been hearing from a lot of fans and reviewers online is that because of the kind of messed up way the first episode was shot, if you do go through the whole season, it makes rewatching the first episode and then rewatching the series much more enjoyable, because then you kind of see the first episode from a different perspective, where all of a sudden these chopped up scenes kind of make sense, and you can kind of put together what you're looking at into a new type of story, which makes it more easier for rewatching, which is something that Netflix is also very happy to do.
Let me point out something else that I really like that stood out to me. I don't know if you noticed it. Or
the full frontal female nudity?
Well, that too. That was, never have enough of that. But this is not exactly a low-budget production. This is not 1970s Doctor Who, but it's also not a AAA, Game of Thrones level production either. And there are places where you can tell that they spent most of their budget on a particular CGI sequence, certain creatures and whatnot. And then you can also tell where there are places where they had to save a little bit of money. Here, put these on your ears. Okay, you're an elf now. And the set decoration is very basic in a lot of sequences. The costuming is kind of they went to a thrift store and put some stuff together. It's not impressive at all. But here's why I like it. It gives it a lightness. It kind of doesn't take itself so seriously. It's not so heavy like Game of Thrones, for example. And I think it gives it a certain, likability factor. I mean, it's just it's fun. It has a fun factor that other shows maybe don't have.
Well, I mean, Game of Thrones obviously kind of like very much kind of set the scene for all of the this idea. We have these kind of. This kind of like mythological kind of medieval squalor that kind of people live in, kind of.
Life was tough back then.
Yeah. There's no electricity. There's no paved roads.
It's always cold and windy.
There are no bathrooms. People are filthy and like eating horrible kind of salmonella infested food. I mean, of course, really, it goes back to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which I think was the kind of was the torchbearer for kind of like medieval realism. But yeah, I mean, it's dimly lit. People are filthy, and they have like unspeakable morals, and
you die when you're 35, basically.
Yeah.
Speaking of Game of Thrones, this occurred to me when I was watching it. Now, I have not seen Game of Thrones all the way. I think you guys have.
Sorry, let's share that one again with us.
I've not seen Game of Thrones all the way through. What?
Oh, all the way through.
All the way through. I've seen bits and pieces, but this occurred to me when I was watching it. Do you think that Netflix Witcher makes it to production in a world where Game of Thrones had not already kind of blazed this trail?
Probably not, no.
Yeah, I can definitely see them.
I think Game of Thrones, especially the fact that it's over now, kind of set the stage for Witcher to kind of step in and satisfy the desires of that audience. It's the same audience.
Definitely there's a lot of overlap there. I mean, Netflix is looking for content. The video games really were hugely popular, so that's great.
20 million sold of the last game.
But the video games might be great source material, as are the books, but they had to realize this is going to cost us a lot of money, and they probably only took that leap when they saw that Game of Thrones was as popular. It's okay, this is something we can go get.
I think
get
season
into.
2 of The Witcher, and again, it's already been approved. I think they'll get a bump in the money they have available. I think they'll have some more resources for. Maybe that's when they'll bring in Nicolas Cage as the king, or somebody.
Has he paid off his
Samuel
taxes
L.
yet?
Jackson as the wizard, or something like that. Here's another thing I find interesting. I was looking at the reviews online of The Witcher, and I've noticed it's basically the reverse of what we had for the most recent Star Wars movie. For the Rise of Skywalker, the user reviews, the reviews of the regular people were meh to negative, and the professional critic reviews were meh to positive. And we have the reverse here with The Witcher. Most regular people really like it, and most reviewers are kind of lukewarm to negative about it. First of all, does that tell you anything, or what are your impressions of that?
Well, when it comes to the review system, especially on Rotten Tomatoes and so forth, they've kind of lost credit in the last few years, especially starting with the previous Star Wars movie, Last Jedi, where critics were 90%, 100%, and people were just, no, we're not into this. And,
best movie ever.
And it just kept on going downhill from there. Yeah. And now people realize, the reviewers, they're only giving out good reviews because they want to have access to these movies later on to give out more reviews.
You make an essential critical point, Dr. Mike, that professional reviewers, especially when it comes to AAA releases, their lifeblood is access to the studios, access to the actors, access to inside information, access to interviews. And the moment they write a critical or even a kind of a mediocre review for a particular film, that studio can cut them off. And don't think for a minute that the studios don't monitor their reviews and don't keep a blacklist of people who are not welcome on their studio lot. They certainly do. Now, I'm not suggesting that every professional movie critic is kind of bought by the studios, but a lot of them are. And a lot of your I don't want to name names, IGN, but a lot of your big media houses are really risking again this future access if they come out and say this sucks. And I think that's why the professional reviews for Star Wars were overwhelmingly positive, and the ones for The Witcher on Netflix were kind of mediocre because maybe the critics don't have those same concerns. Josh?
Well, I think there's an interesting thing going on with Netflix because it's almost like a kind of parallel universe in the sense that you can look at Netflix in isolation, separated from Hollywood, and then so you have kind of oh yeah, this is real kind of pot boiler stuff, like daytime TV, afternoon programming, kind of blah 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 blah, and then there's this kind of slight angle. Well, actually, Netflix are the kind of the outsider, that's kind of barging in and kind of upsetting the Hollywood
disruptor.
Yeah, and they're in Hollywood. Seriously, the big players are really, really concerned about Netflix because they, it's not just TV shows, it's also movies. I mean, something like 50% of new, it's an incredible percentage, 50% of English language new movies from the United States are coming from Netflix. And the big studios and the whole kind of system is not only scared but also kind of aggressive about.
Well, I have to think that bringing Witcher to the screen, at least a small screen, is a masterstroke for Netflix, and I'm assuming that they got it for a pretty good price. Maybe that changes in the future if the show kind of continues to grow. I don't know the economics behind it, but on the strength of the novels, on the strength of the 20 million games sold, a lot of people came to this or are interested in watching because of the video game, right? I think here in Poland, Dr. Mike, we might have a bit of a a distorted view of this because, we're here where The Witcher is a known cultural commodity, so to speak, and the author is well known. for most people outside of Poland, they had never heard of The Witcher before the video game, and that was the kind of like their point of entry. So maybe here in Poland, we think it's the interest in Netflix, in the Netflix version, comes from a different source than it really does come from.
But even here in Poland, people might realize that it was a series of books before it was ever put into on the screen or into a video game. But even then, most people that have had any contact with this property has been through the video game, tenfold times more.
Right.
Like, very few people read the books, well, not few, but a lot
Most
of people
are coming from the game.
Yeah, most people are coming from the game, even here. But they just know that it's...
I understand that that Sapkowski, the author behind the Witcher, he's sold creative control of the IP of The Witcher. In other words, the video game people can take The Witcher into new places, new characters that maybe the Netflix can do the same thing. So there's a lot of flexibility, which is kind of surprising. Because correct me if I'm wrong, Josh. What's his name? Martin from from Game of Thrones. The author Martin, is that his name?
Yeah.
I think he is Game of Thrones. He determines what happens in that universe, and HBO makes the.
Well, the better example of this kind of thing is J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter thing, which she absolutely kind of like maintained.
He has total creative control.
Totally, not only just of the movies and everything like that, but also of everything to do with merchandise, which is why she's the richest woman in the world.
She's mega rich. But as far as I understand, Sapkowski has signed away creative control. Although on the subject of the author, Sapkowski recently, I think just last month in December, he came to a new agreement with CD Projekt Red, which is the studio behind the video game version of The Witcher. When I say agreement, I mean there was some money involved. Because
I'd agree to that as well.
I don't know what he got paid some years ago, but given the value of the franchise today, it wasn't very much. And just for maybe public relations purposes, or maybe honesty purposes, or just to keep a good relationship going forward, they kind of renegotiated. I'm not sure how much money he got, but I'm sure he's a wealthy man. That's for sure. But
I wouldn't be surprised if he's working on new books now, because now there's so much hype and
there's so much interest. Yeah, but again, going forward,
I don't know about that, so I don't.
It would not be surprised to see The Witcher last several seasons going forward, and the fact that they have creative control means that. Kind of like, to go back to the Star Wars comparison, Dr. Mike, they can do what they want. Hopefully the Witcher people will be smarter than the Disney people with the choices they make.
From a lot of fans that, there have been issues with casting and a few, wokeness and things changing in the series, but they've generally kept it going in a way that the fans like and the general audience is like as well. So there's, no issue here of any kind of like conflicts along those lines.
Well, we'll bring it to a close there. We did a whole review without any spoilers. We didn't talk about the storyline at all. But again, if you're interested in the story, go watch it.
Mike hasn't seen any episodes. You've only seen like 4 or 5. I've only seen 4 or 5.
Thanks for giving the game away at the end, Josh.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, it is very, very good. Josh will recommend, even on the basis of his.
No, it's increasingly good.
It's definitely good. Don't
Almost
let the first episode.
Maleficent sequel.
Don't let the first episode turn you off. The first episode is horrible. Sorry, it's just stupid the way they did it. But stick with it. It gets a lot better. You'll be glad you watched it. And there you go. So those are our thoughts on the Witcher. Hey, thanks guys for listening. Oh, don't forget, go to our website, KrakCast.pl. You can find all of our back episodes there. Almost 190 something episodes, I think, something like that. Also the donate button if you want to support the show. So thanks for listening. And
toss a coin to the bards.
Go watch The Witcher and toss us some coins. Yeah, exactly.